Hello, welcome back to class. Once again, I'm Jill, your instructor, and you have the absolute honor of meeting two of the people I really value most in this world, and who have some of the best senses of humor, but they also have the most amazing information to share. Cyndi and Bobby Doyle are a couple, a work team. Cyndi is a licensed therapist. Bobby is a retired cop, and they do work all around the country. Cyndi does code for couples. She has a podcast. She has a book that is on your reading list and is indeed mandatory because it tells you what you need to know if you are working with a law enforcement couple. And you really do need to know this stuff. Don't assume you know. As Kate talked about, there's culture in law enforcement, and couples live in that culture and they need to be approached as part of that. Don't assume that they are a couple like the chaplain couple you are or the therapist couple you are. Although because Cyndi is a therapist, there is a little bit of that. And Bobby has a very cool t-shirt about being married to a therapist. So we'll give him kudos for that. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and then we'll have our conversation.
I mean, Jill, you just did a fabulous introduction. I don't know what I can add. Yes, I'm Cyndi Doyle. I'm a private practice practitioner. I've been a counselor for over 25 years. And if you would have told me 25 years ago that I would have been working with trauma and first responders, I would have laughed because that was not on my radar at all. So yeah, I have my practice focuses a lot on first responders and helping them through trauma. We have been married for 24 years now. We have gone, I'm going to say it this way, cradle to grave with the law enforcement career. So because I met him, the law enforcement career is now over.
On the career path, you did the beginning to end. That's right.
It's a grief class. Come on.
It is.
So we've done, and there's been a lot. I know we're talking about grief, and so there's a lot of griefs along the way, and I wrote some sticky notes out to kind of bounce off of as far as that goes. So yeah, we're here in Texas, and we are country bumpkins, I guess, in a way, but city's not too far away. We live 40 miles from Dallas, but we live on 7 acres with our Chesapeake Bay Retriever. So
yeah, our big not guard dog.
Yes.
So my name is Bobby Doyle. I did 21 years in law enforcement. When did I start? 2000.
2000, yep.
And then I got out.
You were lieutenant.
I was lieutenant, worked my way up. Did patrol for, oh my God, 17, 18 years. And then they transferred me to training and admin and CID, put me in charge of all that. And yeah, that was traumatic.
What's CID?
Criminal investigations. But that was traumatic.
Going to administration off of the streets.
Yeah, off the streets, you know.
I can only imagine.
But pretty much
and
I
you
was
did
on
firearms.
Well, I mean, I did all sorts of training. I mean, a firearms instructor, defensive tactics, taser, OC spray, baton, oh my God, use of force, just I did it all. Just because I was good at it, good at teaching. I wanted to move up, wanted the responsibility. Looking back on it now, did it affect our marriage? It sure did. I want to say the last 8 years when I was lieutenant.
You're on call? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, on call 24/7, 365 days, unless I was out of the country.
Yeah, seriously, unless he was out of the country. Otherwise, he was still getting calls.
Yeah, when we went to Hawaii,
that explains Italy.
Yeah, but those when we were in Hawaii, if we had when you did those conferences, I was taking calls there.
I remember. Yeah.
So yeah, it was fun though. I mean, glad I did it. Glad I got out when I did.
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
glad that I can share my experiences with others.
I really want the course to hear how many kinds of weapons you had to teach people how to manage to defend yourselves as law enforcement officers. I think I counted 9.
Well, let's see. There's well, you have defensive tactics, which is
Hand to hand.
you know, and you have to be more defensive than offensive.
Right.
Well,
Sometimes.
politically correct that way.
Right.
If somebody's trying to kill you, all bets are off, and
Yes.
you've got to bite somebody's nose off, you bite their nose off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're going home.
Right.
But let's see. I mean, we had tasers, we had pepper ball launchers, we had impact munitions, which are beanbag rounds. We had pistols, we had rifles, we had shotguns, we had batons, we had but then we also did a lot of you know, first aid. I mean, we had to carry AED, the defibrillators in our cars with our medical kits, because where I worked, the firemen, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning were asleep. So when you're out patrolling around in the city, you know, if somebody has medical emergency at 2 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock in the morning, doesn't matter.
You're it.
You're the district officer. You're in that area. You go to the, unless you're on something else, you know, but you went to the medical calls too. So not only did we, you know, fight crime and deter crime and put people in jail and all that kind of stuff, but we also try to save lives by, you know, and the defibrillators are, thank God, idiot proof. I mean, we're, you know, I mean, what I'm saying is, you know, I mean, it's like, take this pad, put one here, turn the machine on, and it tells you if it's going to shock and stand back and all that. I mean, it's a great invention, but I mean, so we.
I don't think I want to trust me with that.
And there's
Oh,
also.
you don't want to get shocked by one, I bet.
No, and I don't want to use one
taken
either.
that ride a couple times, so
Yeah.
But,
0 stars.
Yeah, but
I would also say, and I want to make sure we go where we need to go with this, but I think that's part of when we talk about grief too. I
Right.
think this, from my perspective, there, and especially as a spouse, like there's all kinds of grief that we could talk about this, but as a spouse, I didn't understand that he many times would be the first on the scene of a medical call or like a suicide. And he's first on the scene. And so he doesn't just like sit around with his thumb up his butt. Like he is having to.
He's handling it, and he's handling the family.
Right.
yeah, putting a bandage on somebody's head whose brain is dripping out the other side.
Right.
True story.
True story. I mean, no, that was a true story.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean,
you gotta
joke about it, you know.
But it makes an impact too.
Oh yeah.
Oh, sure it does.
Oh yeah.
You know,
for sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to pause and let you go where you want to go with this.
Oh, I like where we're going with this. It is, you are, Bobby as a law enforcement officer faced all kinds of grief, and then he brought it home to you, and you also had your own because he was out there. And I'm just thinking about, he's talking about doing the medical response. You guys just had some massive killer tornadoes in your, literally your neighborhood, and
just north
close enough as the crow flies in Texas. Yeah. And so I'm sure that law enforcement was out responding to that because everybody on, and you're facing that as well. And then you bring that home.
Yeah.
And you've seen people facing that their house has disappeared.
Yes.
Right?
No, I mean, it's you see the whole gamut, you know, whether it's, you know, somebody that needs to go to jail, you know, that, you know, because he beat up his wife. Well, you see the wife, you see the victim there. Then you have okay, somebody who, you know, lost their house, or you know, or there's a suicide. So then you got to deal with the family members, or, you know, Give me a minute. Still gets me. Oh. A dead baby in a pool.
Yeah.
So
That's not something you forget. It stays with you.
well, it's not something you sign up for.
No.
No, we signed up to, you know, chase bad guys and maybe
Protect.
smack them around a little bit. Not do a
When
lot
they
of
need it.
paperwork and put them in jail. I mean, you want the truth. That's what, you know,
Right.
everybody says, oh, I want to help the community and all this. Well,
Bobby
yeah,
wanted to
okay.
play with guns.
Yeah, but you want to do the good stuff, you know, like kick
You taught
doors
people
in
how
and-
to.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. You don't want to do that. But I mean, the other
Not a
stuff
baby in
just
a pool.
really just sucks.
Mhm.
But somebody's got to do it. And the big part of that is your humor turns really dark.
Yes, it does.
Not about the baby in the pool. I mean, that's just wrong. But I mean, people that shot themselves or killed themselves. I mean, we would, you know, have very dark humor to deal with it. So
That's something that when I think about how it kind of spills over a little bit, one of the spillovers for us is, especially as a mental health professional, I have this compassion for people that are struggling with suicide, right? People in a dark space. And, you know, he and I have both been in dark spaces before. That's not something new to us. What changes in part, couple of different things that I'll mention in grief though, but what changes is that he changes, right? So one of our
compassion.
yeah,
No
compassion
compassion for suicide.
well, and just the flatness. Even recently, we had a friend who passed away, and the flatness that came a part of it was like, I mean, people die, and I'm like, yeah, but it's a little bit different. He goes, I dealt with dead people all the time, and that's that almost like that compartmentalization,
Self-protective.
right, which is self-protective, and that compartmentalization of like being able to deal with what he deals with. But as a spouse, I'm talking to him about, like, this was one of our regular arguments, and I said, well, but they must have been in a dark place. And he would say, no, they're just a bunch of, I don't know if I can swear on your thing, but
Yes, you can.
okay, he's like, no, they're just a bunch of assholes, right? They didn't think about, and then he went into this dark humor. He had a whole like rental company he was going to set up online in order to help people facilitate this. Like, if you want to die, go die. Don't bring it to my door, right? That kind of a
Don't
thing.
make your family find you.
Let me
See,
right?
that's
So-
where a lot of the darkness came from, because the people that killed themselves, we had to go see their families.
Yeah.
We had to tell the family, or we had to go there after the family find them. And that's where, you know, the callousness, I guess, is maybe the word.
Yeah.
Towards the, I don't know, a victim, I guess, is what
The
you know,
deceased.
the person, the deceased. Okay. You know, that's where I became very callous. I mean, I remember we had a guy that he killed himself. We figured out he killed himself on Christmas Eve.
Oh, is this the polite suicide?
But we didn't. Yeah, the polite suicide.
He calls it the polite suicide.
But we didn't find out until I think it was December 30th. I don't think it was New Year's Eve. It wasn't New Year's Eve, but I think it was like, well, maybe it was January 1st, but it was not New Year's Eve. I know that. But he was found, but he had left all these notes. And he had put everything in order, his life insurance policy, his driver's license, his checkbook, everything. And
On
then
the counter, right?
yeah, and he's like, and I'm upstairs in the bedroom, and you know, I did this and I covered up and blah blah blah. But please take care of my dog. And he had left his dog in one of the other bedrooms with, oh my God, it was like a week's worth of food, I guess. But the dog ate most of the food. And I mean, there's water in there. I mean, I give him credit. But the dog, you can tell, had been in there for like 4 or 5 days, because it was, you know, his business everywhere. But you know, but I felt bad for the dog. I mean, I didn't care
Yeah.
about this guy that's like, I mean, he laid out a tarp and I mean, he covered
Didn't he
up
even do
and
like a
he had
sleeping
a
bag
sleeping
or something?
bag.
Yeah,
I mean,
wrapped it up, very
it
clean.
was very self-contained. I mean, that like when the what do you call it?
Emmy.
ME came and everything, they just kind of like folded it all up, you know what I mean? And put it on and put them in the bag, you know, and it's like, I mean, there was nothing anywhere else in the room, you know.
No
but I felt
investigation
bad
needed.
for the dog,
Mhm.
you know, and you know, but you get callous to, you know,
Mhm.
because then you got to tell the family, and it's like, you know, hey, you know, whatever, you know, what do you tell somebody?
Nobody trains them for that, right? Nobody
no.
tells them, hey, this is how
No.
you're, and there aren't, you know, that's what I thought, something different. Like there's not this group of chaplains that go around and tell, like, they're there on scene, so they're doing it.
Right.
So
Yeah,
And
and
then-
nobody trains you with what to tell the families and how to take care of yourself when you get home.
yeah,
Right. I mean, to us, it was just like, well, that work, you know. I mean, just seriously, it was like, you know, just
Just another day.
it was not a person anymore. You know, you
Mhm.
detach from that, and it just became, you know, a piece of meat,
an object.
an object, an object. Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay. You don't have to be
Yes.
sorry. It's your words,
No,
right?
you don't. You do not.
Okay, so that takes
So
care
did
of-
someone
there's a
take
lot
the
of-
dog? I do need to know. Did someone
Oh
take
yeah,
the dog?
yeah. We
Jill's concerned about the dog.
I'm
the
worried
guy
about the dog.
the friend that found him, adopted the dog or whatever. You
Good.
know, so
Oh.
that was cool.
So there's a lot of calls. That's one of my sticky notes that I had, was the calls that you go on
Yeah.
and the grief that comes from the calls, the grief that comes from having to do the work of the business of the work,
Right.
right? That
And some
wasn't a
calls
part
just
of it.
made you angry, you know, which caused, because you saw the grief of like
Oh yeah.
a guy that beat the hell out of his wife.
Yeah.
And you have to be professional, you have to be courteous, you have to be nice. Where what you really want to do is take the guy out back and just
Do unto him.
take, well, you know, we're worse, you know.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
you know, the hell with the court system. But just saying,
But you're
it
dealing-
goes.
Right. And you're dealing with what she's just
Yeah,
faced,
yeah.
and that she's
You can't fix it at the time.
you can't. And there's a likelihood that it's going to happen again too.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So
One of the other ones that I just wrote down while he was talking too was a concept called of moral injury,
Yes.
which I think also is a lot of grief as well, because it's the grief of not being able to follow your own moral code, or the grief of having to put that aside in order to do something else. And it can just be so I have an example of that that's not Bobby's, but it's one that I'm familiar with. Was there was a call in the city right next to where he worked, of a father who pulled the toddler out and was beating him in the middle of a apartment complex. One of the
taking the baby by its feet and slamming it onto a sidewalk.
yes,
Yeah.
there's got. And so in the apartment complex, people were trying, and he was saying the baby was possessed. So
So we know there was something in dad. Yeah.
there was something, yes, either in dad, that was chemical, one way or the other. Right, or he was possessed. There you go. So it was in an apartment complex, and so the apartment complex in the middle in the courtyard, and so the other people were trying to stop dad, and so one of the residents, I think, wound up shooting the dad. Well, I happen to work with people in this department, and one of the ambulances, one of the paramedics had to take the dad and work on saving his life. And the other one was trying to work on saving the baby's life.
Baby.
But the moral injury of working on somebody that just tried to kill someone, like that's a moral injury, because that's not something want to do, right? So there's lots of little, I think, moral injuries
Mm-hmm.
that cause grief, but then also I know you mentioned like post-traumatic stress and bringing that up a little bit, but that a lot of times we don't see or consider those moral injuries. And I don't think our first responders are educated enough, and I don't think our supportive personnel, whether it's counselors or pastors, are educated enough about moral injury. I think that the term is out there, but people are just now trying to start to really put some words around it and understand how that injury, that grief really is painful, and breaks a moral code. And I think there's other moral issues that
but
go
I
against
don't think
you.
the departments recognize that yet either.
Yeah.
No.
you
I
know.
mean, you go and you do this paramedic who, saved the dad or the one that tried to save the baby, they get a medal or they get a commendation of some
Oh,
sort.
we talked about that before. That's
So
talk about that. That's
you
good.
get commended or whatever, you get recognition
Right.
for doing something that goes against everything that you stand for.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
then well, I did good, but
But for the wrong person.
it's so good because I'm like, I really wanted to kill the guy, but then I would have gotten in big trouble for that. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
this parent not done his best job with the dad. Who would have blamed him?
Mhm.
Well, a lot of people would have, but I mean, I personally wouldn't have blamed him. But I could see where he would feel, like, so I get recognized for saving this guy's life, who's a piece of
Shit.
shit.
You can
excuse
say it.
me.
Mm-hmm.
I said
You know?
asshole. You can say shit.
So
Yes. You can say all the things.
and I think departments do that, give you the recognition to make you feel better. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound, though.
Mhm.
Oh, you'll feel better because you got a thing in your file that said you did a good job or whatever.
We put your picture in the paper.
But
Yeah. And we put your picture in the paper getting your award and
Commendation.
yeah,
go
yeah.
team.
But yeah,
It doesn't feel good.
no. Mm-mm. So, I mean, you nobody tells you that you sign up for that either,
Right.
and I think if you told people everything they're going to do in first responder world, I don't care if you're EMT, firefighter,
I agree.
police officer,
Dispatcher,
military, even everything that you're going to come across, nobody would want to do it.
Right.
But I think once people start,
people go in thinking they're going to make a difference and they don't understand, the what they're exposed to.
Right.
And I would say, like, also spouses don't really understand that either, because we went in this together. He was in the middle of career transition when we met, and I was like, my thought was, yeah, go be a cop, go be a police officer, because you know why? They have stable careers. That's what I thought. I was like, you'll always be able to get a job. That sounds good. It's a stable career. You'll get a good paycheck. And that's really, and he thought,
And I won't sleep for 24 years.
Well, right. And his thought was, well, he has a black belt in karate. And he said, well, I can use the skills I have. I know karate. I'm very proficient in firearms, and I can use these things, and I work well with people.
All true. But
anyway,
but look what
exactly,
you got into.
That's like this here, and then all this over here. These skills don't translate, and
it impacts when you get home.
Yeah, and you don't know the impact, the cumulative impact of. I don't care if it's
big
words.
5 years doing it, 10 years,
the chronic nature of it, right?
30, 40, Yeah.
And that is why law enforcement does need to retire at a reasonable time and not put in decades upon decades upon decades, because there's too much you absorb in that time, even if you're not trying to absorb it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, so Bobby started when he was 35. It was a second career for him.
Yeah.
And so, you know, doing 21, almost 22, like just shy of 22 years. But then you have other people that start at 18, right?
Jailers and
Or even I know somebody who started as a volunteer firefighter, right? Started as a volunteer firefighter when he was 18, and he is now in his late 30s. That's a long time, and he is nowhere near retirement because
No.
he is just having children, right? So you look at that and it's like, where do you go from there? Which I want to talk about in a minute.
Yes.
I have this sticky note that I want to talk about, but we want to talk. Can I back up and talk
Please.
about some of the grief? I wrote a sticky note about relationships and the grief of a relationship, because first of all, I think now there's a little bit more awareness, but I was really naive when we started, and this is prior to 9/11. And I remember watching 9/11 and realizing that they were running into the danger. And that's when I realized, oh shit, that's what my husband does, is he runs into it. He doesn't run away like all the rest of the people. So it was my first realization. I also resisted, because Jill knows me, I'm a very independent person. I think that is why he married me, is because I'm very independent. I think
Right.
he sometimes forgets that. But like,
I get reminded.
I can do it, right? But my thought was, well, you have your career and I have my career, and you go over there and do your thing, and then you come home and we talk about your day and I talk about my day, and this is what we're going to do. And that is not what happened, because he is working shifts. He is tired because he's on that hypervigilant cycle of up, down, up, down. So he is exhausted. The man I get home is not the man who shows up at work, because every people that he would work with, like the citizens, would be like, your husband is so funny. He's got such a good sense of humor. And I'd be like, oh, well, I don't see that at home.
Where did that go?
Yeah, because that's part of the reason why I fell in love with him, is because of his sense of humor. He just became a totally different person. And there's these aspects where, as a spouse, like, because I didn't get it, because I didn't have information, which is why I wrote that, right? Because I didn't have information. It's just like, put on your big girl panties, right? This is what happens.
You signed up for this. You told me I should do this career.
Right. It's like, well, this is what you get. This is what you sign up for. And so there's a lot of loss in regard to losing the person that you married, in a way, right? That he's there but not there. He would we went several years, I think you said 5 years, where we didn't have a weekend together. I would
We didn't sleep in the same bed, really.
I mean, we slept in the same bed, but not at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. So he would be gone when I got home. And then the weekends, he'd get up around, I don't know, get up for a couple hours, and I try to talk to him, and he put on his uniform and go to work. And so we didn't see each other. So there's grief in the idea, like the loss of dreams, I think is a big part of the grief too, because the idea of what I thought marriage would look like, you know, when we get married, I mean, I knew it wasn't going to be like we were going to sit down and have dinner every night, but I also didn't get how it was going to change him, how my life would be impacted. As much as I resisted trying to say, like, I'm impacted, I really resisted the idea of, like, I'm a police wife, because the typical police wife thing, right? I'm like, no, I'm a counselor. I have my own identity.
And I understand this stuff.
Yeah. But there's a loss there of dreams, of vacations, of,
but we also took
for us
granted
children too, because we didn't wind up having children too as a part of it. So there's like regular loss of dreams.
But like I said, I took for granted that you would be here.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I'm like, I'm gonna go to work. I'm gonna like the hell with the outside world. The hell with
Right.
my wife. She'll be there when I get home. Oh, work call. I gotta go.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
This is an incredibly stupid thing that I'm having to do or scary, but you don't think about it. You don't think about your family. You just do it.
You just go do it. Because if
And
you
it's
think
like,
about your family, you're not concentrating enough.
right. So it's like, well, she'll be there. Oh, you need somebody to work extra. Yeah, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah.
So
And
so
the relationship goes away because or falls to the side because the work interferes and the work is a calling of sorts, and you've got to do what you've got to do.
right.
And there's a relationship at work and a family at work that's depending on you to show up because they need you.
That had a lot to do with it too. And it's not just, it's also the idea of you might, and I'm speaking for you, but this is just what you've told me. I might miss out on something. They might need me, right? So if I'm not there, then I failed and I failed them. And that was, never mind the fact that I wanted him home, never mind the fact that I wanted to have a vacation with him, never mind the fact of like, can't you just take off a couple days? Nope, we're short. So there was a lot of and we've talked about this. I'm not throwing him under the bus. It's okay.
No, I mean, yeah.
So
Now you do
but there's a
wonderful
lot of
vacations together.
yeah, there's a lot of losses with that. And then like you were talking about the spillover too of a call and many times it's kind of this, I think for spouses, we're like, well, what do we need to do? How do we help? Right. And because this is the question I get a lot. And so it's like, well, talk to me about it. And he's like, I don't want to freaking talk about it. I don't want to unpack it. I don't want to, like, why do I want to bring this up? And so then even now, like just when we were talking, like what he shared about the pool, I'm like, I don't know that I've ever heard that. So he will say that.
Well, we'll get into the counseling thing later.
He will say, I mean, he went.
Had to go.
But he'll tell me, and on the podcast, there'll be every now and then there'll be something that came up, and I'll be like, wait, this is the first time I heard about it. And he said, that's because I tried to protect you. But there's a loss because I don't know what's going on in his world. And because of that shutout, we weren't as connected, right? So anyway, it's work in a different way.
It is.
Okay, so
I'm thinking about that. When I was interviewing Cammie, she was telling me about some incidents on the dock in the morgue, the gigantic morgue in New York, where Stacy was deployed with her during COVID. I had known none of the stories that the two of them described. She described the military folks standing at attention as they unloaded a trailer full of children. I had never heard about it. I walked in afterwards and said, do you remember that? And she's like, kind of vaguely. When those days are done, you close the door to the hotel room, you take a shower, and you start over the next day, and you just don't want to keep it with you. Right? You just don't hear it. And so we don't know how to help them debrief or what to do.
Right. It's the compartmentalization aspect where it's really healthy and not always healthy.
Not always healthy, right? A trailer full of children.
It's a thin line.
I wrote down administrative. A lot of times we talk about administrative betrayal, especially with first responders, specifically with fire, paramedic, but I would say probably
mostly
law enforcement. I always think, law enforcement, administrative betrayal. Do you want to talk about some of that and how that's related to grief?
Well, I think you had the moral injury there, that you get praised for doing something that's against. But then the other thing is, everybody has their own morals, values, and ethics, and sometimes it's on a sliding scale, unfortunately. And one of mine was, these are the standards, and especially when I did defensive tactics or firearms training, use of force stuff, I had standards, and they were here. They were the high. And people that couldn't meet them, I was told at times, no, you have to dumb it down to the lowest common denominator so that everybody can pass. And I'm like, and I have to put my name on that, you know, and so, you know, it really bothered me at times that I had to do that. You know, at the same time, though, I mean, I was like, well, you know, if something happens, I'm going to tell the God's honest truth that I was told to do this or I was told to do that. And I had records of, you know, everything that I would, lesson plans or whatever. This is what I proposed. This is what was approved. And this was what
they got away
I had
with.
to do. Wanted to keep my job and my position. And I, you know, it really eats away at you at times. So I think there was some grief there. There were times when, you know, you just didn't, you thought you were doing the right thing. Like, for instance, one time we had a guy that had felony warrants. So one of my guys gets his bread out. He goes, I know where this guy is. We're like, okay. He goes, let's go get him. I'm like, okay, fine. You know, settle down. So we go and get him. And he was in the mayor's son's restaurant after hours. They were having an after hours party. Okay. So we go in, and, you know, we didn't break down doors or anything like that. We just walked in because the doors were locked. We're like, what are y'all doing? Oh, hey, that guy, get okay, fine. Take him off to jail. I get home at 8 o'clock in the morning. I get a call from the chief of police. What the F do you think you're doing? I'm like, what? He goes, get your ass back to this department right now. We got a meeting. Oh, crap. So I got to put my uniform back on, drive back to work. The mayor was reaming the chief because we went into her son's restaurant and arrested somebody with felony warrants.
Seems to me if you got felony warrants, you need to go to jail.
Right.
That's how it works.
Reamed in the chief's office, and he goes, "Are you going to go down there and tell the mayor?" I'm like, "You want me to go down there and tell the mayor?"
He's like, I'll tell her.
I said, "I'll tell her." He's like, "Jesus, no." And he's like, "No, you don't know how to put a name and blah blah blah." And I go home and go to sleep, and then we'll talk about this later. I'm like, oh, God's sake. But you know, so you think you're doing the right thing,
right?
But then, and deep down, the chief knew we were doing the right thing, but being that we were at will employees, you know, the mayor could have just fired him and me and everything right then and there that day, you know? So not my fault your son associates with shitbags, but you know, so
out here the mayor can't fire police officers, but wow.
Yeah. So it kind of is it just it wears on you.
Yeah,
you know?
The entitlement. And we can tell you what to do with your career when you're the one doing the right thing.
I think it's also the conflict of culture. And here's why I'm going to say that. And there's grief around the concept that, because we have this phrase we use all the time in law enforcement, which is, I got your six, right? So that means like, I got your back, right? Don't worry about it. I got your six. And that's like beaten into you, right? Like, hey, you've got to have each other's back. You got to watch out for each other. And so it's this concept of culturally that you're this family and watching out for each other until somebody
you're not
right way. And so it becomes this conflict, and it kind of goes to that moral injury, that administrative betrayal, you know, shit rolls downhill basically is what it is. And they're going to find the lowest common denominator in order to do that.
And save their own skin.
One of the things that I really admire about my husband that I will brag about is my husband was basically like a bumper. He was the stop, not a stopgap, but he's like, no, this is my command. And I am going to protect these guys. And if you think they're wrong, I'm the one who led them, and I'm the one who's going to take it. So give me the heat, not them. And that was one thing I really admired about him, because he protected all of his command underneath him, all of his field ops, because he's like, no, I'm not going to let you roll it downhill to them unless they deserved it.
If they, no,
unless
if
they
they
deserved
screwed
it,
up,
right?
they got,
You got what was coming?
but if it was unfair, no, I'd say this is unfair and this is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Want to write them up? Then you write them up, because I ain't signing it, and I'm going to tell them the reason that they're being written up.
It seems like,
Of course,
it
I
should
took
be,
a couple write-ups for that kind of attitude, but
Yeah, maybe.
whatever.
maybe. But you know, it seems like in law enforcement, right? It's black and white. It's legal, it's illegal, right? And then you have this culture of, I got your six, I got your back. We're gonna go in. I got your back on this. But ultimately, there's a lot of betrayal that happens. And when people find out that that culture is not exactly safe, that winds up being a lot of grief too. And you know,
Is it
loss of
identified
work.
by the people working on the line as grief, as loss? Do you see it that way, Bobby, while you're in the middle of it? Or is it more the long view now that you are more away from it and retired?
I saw it somewhat, I
did you
didn't
see it as grief?
No, I didn't see it as grief. I didn't and when I was first in, my first, I don't know, 10, 11 years, it was like, no, this is what they say, this is what we're gonna do, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, just, I don't care. I was blindly following until I figured out that, wait a minute. And then I would think about why we were doing certain things. And then I could see sometimes it was politically motivated. Sometimes it was, somebody screwed up, but they didn't want to tell anybody, but then you just kind of figure it out. And so then I would take that and use it and tell the guys and girls, okay, you don't want to do this operation or this special assignment or whatever that they're making us do. But here's why we're doing it. And you don't like it. I get it. I don't like it either. But we have to go out and give it 100%. And we have to get some results. And we'll do it for a little while. The storm will pass, and then we'll move to something else. But I'm going to do it with you. And I don't want to hear you crying about it. Now, that always worked? No, but it helped a lot. And it helped me to understand that, there was grief on their parts, with whether it's a loss of, identity, sometimes a loss of autonomy, they're like, oh, we're alpha.
Right.
A lot of
That's why you choose this career. Right.
Right. So when you take away what they perceive as their discretion, their autonomy, or whatever, then they kind of get, well, they either crawl into a hole or they become the total ass. So you have to, figure it out and kind of guide,
I'm going to throw in the counselor perspective on this. So what I have learned over the years is that I first of all, as a spouse, it's anger, right? So it's this really, it's not I don't think it's identified as grief. I think I label it as grief because I can see the griefs, because I know grief is not just death and dying, right? Grief is a loss of identity. Grief is a loss of ideals. Grief is like, there's a lot of losses.
Lots of role, lots of things. Yeah.
Yeah, lots and lots of things. I think as a spouse, I saw it as anger, and it was a lot of anger. And so I think of like that anger iceberg, right? That comes in that we all are familiar with. And so, it's that reaction that is so apparent to me. And so I know when there's a reaction that there's usually something underneath it. Also, the idea of locus of control, right? So in a way, he's talking about the autonomy, and what I would label that is, that autonomy, the locus of control, and that locus of control, like an internal versus an external locus of control. When you think of what they have to do and what they're conditioned to respond to, they're conditioned to respond to external locus of control, right? Here's a call, go do the thing. I know you don't want to do this, but you have to do it anyway. That's what you just said, right?
Mhm.
Like, this is what we're commanded to do. Hey, you did the right thing. Oh, but you screwed up, right? So all of these external locusts of control, which I think leads to blame of other people. So what I see is, as a spouse, what I saw was anger and blame. And then now as a clinician, even though I was a clinician then, but I did other things, in specializing in this now, I see that that locus of control has a lot to do with that anger and that blame. Because if I have anger and blame and I displace it, then I don't have to feel it, right?
Mhm.
Because grief is painful. And so if I have to think about that grief and that loss, then what does that then bring up? Well, okay. And I had an, he's around. I graduated an officer one time, but he gave me a meme, and it's this glass, it's like a cabinet, kitchen cabinet door. It has a glass in it, and it's these dishes that are like falling out and they're against the glass. And it says, what I feel like when my therapist asks me how I feel about things. Like, if I open the door, it's all going to come.
It's all
out.
coming. Right.
And I think that's probably a big part of not identifying things as grief, because when you start talking about grief and loss and pain and hurt and sadness, like, you can tell, like, there's it's there, right? It reverberates a
It's
little
sitting
bit.
here.
And
Mhm.
yeah. And so when you start to open that up, what is a first responder supposed to do with that? And there's a lot. So I think it's easy to go to blame and to that external and get angry than it is to identify things as grief. And
Well, that's weak for us to be.
yeah, there you go. So
Yeah,
that,
it's weakness
I mean,
and uh-huh.
yeah, I
It
mean,
is. And you also have to be able to stay focused. And if you're going to let the grief out, there's a risk that
can't
you
do it on
can't
the
put the
job.
cork back in it. Right?
Yeah, that's it.
and you know, over the years, we did have people that, I mean, we had one guy, I don't remember, we went to something, and I mean, it was a crap show. You know, it was I don't know if it was an overdose or something, but he, after the call, he told his field trainer, it was Jared, my friend
Oh,
Jared was his training officer, and he said, Jared said, okay, we got to go do this, and the guy looked at him and goes, no. Jared said, no, we have to go. I don't know what they had to do. Go to the hospital, and I don't know. They had to do something. And the guy's like, no, I'm done. And Jared's like, what? And he goes, I quit. Take me back to the PD. I'm done. I mean, this guy had been doing the job for, well, just like maybe 6 months, and he was
He
done.
just couldn't do it.
He couldn't do it anymore, and he didn't want to do it anymore. And it was just like, wow. And so I think people, you know, you have to, you have to push it down sometimes. I mean, you know, you just, or you can't function. You know, I mean, unfortunately, I mean, you know, so
Because there's other things
unfortunately, you do
coming and
that
there's no
enough, then
one to
everything
cover.
becomes, yeah, but
yeah.
yeah, you do it enough, and then it's how you live.
Right.
So
Not the same
Um,
level, but when I worked hospice and did pediatric hospice, and we'd have child deaths, which were expected. It was not the pool. It was an expected. It was at home. It was peaceful. It was still a child.
yes,
And the coroner has to respond to every child death, even though it's an expected death by law. And so the child isn't taken away by a mortuary nice and pretty. The child goes into a coroner's van, and it doesn't feel settling for folks. And so when I was at the scene, I would have to then direct our staff to go on to the next, because we had other kids elsewhere who still needed to be seen that day.
yeah,
And yet everyone was connected to that child. And
yeah,
so we would get literally 10 minutes, do a quick circle, and then go. And if we need to process it, it has to wait. Now, that's not the same level of intensity by any means as having to go out and deal with whatever comes next that you don't have a say so over. We could plan our days, right? We had some
yeah,
control.
but I mean, I think
But
debriefing, I mean, helps.
Mhm.
But there were a lot of times we didn't have time to debrief.
That's what I
and
mean. You didn't.
Just
No.
go to the next one.
And at the end of the shift, I mean, it was like you were so exhausted or whatever, or you're working overtime because you got to finish up all the paperwork and this and that.
Mhm.
It's like, you know what? I'm done, and I don't want to talk about it anymore, and I don't want to go. And where I worked, a lot of the guys and girls, I mean, we would go at the end of the shift, we would go, everybody wanted to go home to their
I
family.
was just going to talk about that. Yeah.
Which, sometimes like Chief Ed in the old days in Dallas, they would all grab some beer and go sit under a bridge in Dallas and drink beer and shoot off their guns in the 70s. Okay. What I mean, but not at people, just,
In general.
in general, and
Right. Mhm.
blow off some steam and stuff. But I think times have evolved somewhat.
Mhm.
And that's a slippery slope too of, if you go with the guys or girls from work, well, you had alcohol and stuff. That sometimes that's not a good thing.
Sometimes things happen that aren't supposed to. Yes.
And then, then that becomes your ritual, and then your family suffers. So I mean,
Mhm.
it's a two-sided coin,
Mhm.
and
But if you just
I
go home
think-
to family because you want to get away, then you don't. If you tamp it down, it just sits.
but what you can't
Well, it's also that
decompress, yeah.
downside of hypervigilance where their
Mhm,
brain
mhm.
isn't like, they're offline. I think that's something that's very different for when we're talking about the different disciplines. If now see, I call it the firehouse, but if people are firefighters, right? Firefighters they have each other
Mhm.
and they go and they are together and I know they talk afterwards, right? Or they'll go and work
They
out
live
afterwards, right?
together.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is very different when you're thinking about dispatchers. I know some people call them telecommunicators, but when you're thinking about dispatchers and when you're thinking about police, now there's all the TV shows are like my partner in my squad car. Like most departments are not big cities.
Right.
Most departments are mid to small. And so they ride solo. And sometimes they don't see anybody. Sometimes they don't see an officer at all because they have their geographic region and they don't interact unless something comes up, right? And so, I mean, I know that. And so I think there's a big difference there when you think also of dispatchers, like maybe they can talk to another dispatcher if they're there in the same room, but most of the time they're by themselves and
They're
they're not.
busy too.
Yeah, and they're just going from call to call to call, just like officers. So I think that's it's different with disciplines in the sense that most of the time officers and dispatchers, I think, don't have anybody to decompress with. And so they're used to just shoving it down and moving on versus some of the other disciplines are used to venting a little bit more. So, so I wrote down two that I don't know if we want to talk about at all. One of them is more like a loss of a dream too. One of them was like positions at work. So I know that there are some coveted positions. Y'all didn't have this, but I know some of my people have dogs, right?
Oh,
And
right.
so that's a very coveted position to be
Dog handler?
what do you call it?
Canine officer.
Canine officer, thank you. To be a canine officer, but it's also a lot of work because you have to have the right dog and you have to be able to do the work with the dog. And I run into a lot of people that are not able to, or they get passed over for promotion over and over again, or they aren't able to pass a test that they have to pass. And so, unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know, he was pushed into a position where he did not want to be. And
Lieutenant?
yeah, he wanted to stay sergeant. He loved being sergeant. He loved being on the street. He loved being on calls. And when he was basically given like, you do this or else kind of a decision, he moved up to lieutenant. And he grieved the fact that he wasn't on the street. He loved being on the street. And
Did not love administration.
That one was pouring down rain.
yeah. But I mean, like he enjoyed that work, right?
Mhm.
And he would even get in trouble at times for going as a lieutenant. He would go to calls or go to scenes, and they'd be like, that was good grammar, wasn't it? His administration would say, you need to stay in the office and you just need to be command. Well, that's because the people above him weren't interested in doing that, specifically his commander. And so, anyway, that's a long story. So, there's that kind of grief too that I put in.
People have lost a dream where they don't get to be a sergeant or a lieutenant or a detective or K9. So, but
you want to talk about that one?
now some people are unrealistic about their expectations in life, but that's what
Right.
they
I've worked with some K9 officers, and I watched what they had to go through to get to that spot.
Oh yeah, I mean,
And
it's-
they changed departments in order to get to that spot, and gave up seniority just to get that spot, and it was really hard work.
It is. It's definitely a calling within the department, to be a K9 officer,
And when I worked for the police department many years ago, I watched some people promote who absolutely should not have been promoted. And some
Yes.
people who didn't want to promote and got pushed into it because the one who did get promoted really needed to leave.
Yes.
Right? And all of that made for different kinds of grief because it changed the nature of that department because it was a small department.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And that's where once I accepted being a lieutenant, I was like, you know what? I can still affect change, positive change. And I can have more influence with policies and procedures. And it took me a while to figure it out, but
especially when you're changing the whole nature of it. Yeah.
And it felt good that finally I got the guys would come to me. And it's like, they didn't go to the chief, they didn't go, they're like, hey, LT, we got a problem. Let's fix it. Can you help us fix it? They never went to the commanders. They didn't, so.
And one of my proudest moments was the first time he called me and says, hey, I got a guy in here and I need a referral for a counselor. And then he became the guy that had the open door, and they all would go into his office and say, hey, I have a problem. I need some help. And that just made my heart sing, considering he thought mental health was a bunch of hooey before. So, okay.
And now he wears the therapist. Now he wears the therapist husband shirt.
I do.
It says real men marry counselors is what it says.
I didn't remember the words, but yes.
Another grief thing with law enforcement is internal affairs or professional standards, as they call it. It's how do I say this? Nobody wants to do that job. Okay.
Nobody wants to have an IA against them.
Nobody wants to have an IA against them.
But nobody wants to be the one investigating either.
No. And what sucks about it is, you have to do, I had to do IAs for the last, I think, 5 years of my career. I did all the IAs, and thank God we didn't have that many, but the thing is, when you had them, you like the people. Most of the time, there was one that I had to do. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna nail this guy to the wall just because he's such an asshole. And he was wrong. You know what I mean? And but then there were others that I had to do where I'm like, I like this guy. He's a good guy. Yeah, did he screw up and all that? Yeah. And you don't like having to be the bad guy. And then you are absolutely not allowed to talk with anybody about it except for the higher ups. I could have an IA going. I could not talk to my wife. I couldn't talk to, if I were a religious person, I could not talk to my priest. You couldn't talk to anybody about it.
Well, that's what they told you. I have a different theory, but go ahead.
What?
A lot of stress.
Yes. I want to talk about that side. That's why I wanted him to talk about this.
Yes.
But you can't, and as the as the person under investigation, you're not supposed to talk to anybody but your spouse, your police representative, or your clergy. Okay. Now everybody knows in the department that somebody's getting in trouble, and they know who it is because the person's on leave or whatever, under suspension or whatever. But you know, you don't. And finally, I went to a class on internal affairs, how to do it properly. And I remember the words the guy teaching the class. He said, "You fight for the officer until you can't fight for them people."
I like that.
I'm like, okay. So you give them every chance. And then, I mean, if they're wrong, they're wrong. I mean, and then the good thing is I never, well, except twice, but all the other times I didn't have to, well, I had to make a recommendation on punishments, but I never had to enact them. That was always, thank God, that was the chief, you know. And while sometimes I didn't agree with his action, you know, I was like, okay, well, at least I didn't have to do it. If somebody said, well, you're the one who did the investigation, I'm like, yeah, and I did to the best of my ability. The person was wrong or the person wasn't wrong. And, you know, fair is fair, you know. But it sucked because, I mean,
and it took a toll.
Well, these people, I mean, you worked with them for years, and I mean, you liked them, or I liked them, you know, and you didn't want to screw them, except for the one guy. But he did do something.
Did it change your relationship with them after the IA was closed?
Somewhat, yes.
Sorry, I was looking at the poodle.
Oh,
Fred couldn't help himself.
Non-brown dog, the cleaned up dog. It did. I mean, to where there wasn't that level of closeness or trust anymore. Although, you know, the people that were my friends, that like,
or that had been there a while,
they understood that I was doing a job and I was not playing favorites. I mean, they respected that I was doing it. They didn't like that I had to do it, but we had a mutual respect for each other. And you know, when it was all said and done, as long as I found out, as long as the administration told everybody, you know, what happened and what was done, and this is the outcome, and they were upfront with everybody and didn't try and whitewash it, one for good or for bad, that people, you know, they got over it after a while.
I think so. Part of that too that I want to throw in is this idea of the internal affairs. Like, as I think as professionals, we all have some kind of professional standards that we have to adhere to, right? So you have a board that people can complain to and that you have to report to. I have a board. I assume that other chaplains, other people do too. There's some kind of a board. On both sides of this, not just, you know, Bobby's unique in the sense that I don't think he mind, like he's been through an IA and he's done IAs, like right? So so the idea is, like, with an IA, and even with like a board complaint in our world, like there's shame there that can take people down, right? And then when they tell you don't talk to anybody, don't you dare tell anybody, well, now we're going to isolate them in shame. And so when we're thinking about grief and loss, like I went through my own situation in 2008, and my thought was, oh my gosh, the loss of my career, the loss of my identity, because being a police officer is very much an identity. Being a police spouse is very much an identity. And I learned a lot of police spouses are like, how dare you leave this career? How dare you get in trouble? How dare you? Because now I have to give up my identity and I can't say my husband's a police officer. Oh, it's a thing, Jill. Let me tell you.
Oh my gosh.
I had, yes, it is a thing. And
It's not a thing
so,
with therapists. But
well,
wow.
not with therapists, but in our
Yeah.
community,
Oh
like
yeah.
I don't, if you were to look at my house, like I have my company sign
Mhm.
here. I have one pillow sitting over there in that chair that has a thin blue line on it. We don't have anything else in our house that is really police related, right? I'm trying to think of
We had that
anything
little
else.
figurine your dad.
Oh yeah,
carved
we
or
have
something.
like little figurines, a carving. I
That
think
our
I have
dad
some
did.
Boyd's bears or something, like little things. But there are people that like their whole house
Oh
is
yeah.
decorated, right?
In law
And so
enforcement. Mhm.
when that is your core identity, and that loss of identity, that is
Mhm.
devastating, and to the point of suicide, right? So
Mhm.
and I kind of wanted to weave that in to go like, okay, we talked about kind of like loss and suicide in the calls, but then I also want to kind of bleed over into something that's really important in our community, especially in law enforcement, because
Right.
up until last year, which I don't think is accurate, but up until last year, so Blue Help is the organization that we lean on a lot for looking at suicides and deaths. And so up until 2003 stats, there were more police suicides than there were LODs or line of death duties, a line of deaths.
Line of duty death.
Line of
Line of
duty
duty.
deaths. I'll get that out.
Mhm.
Right. So thank you, babe. Line of duty deaths. And so looking at suicide is important because it's very probable that that a law enforcement officer, I'll just speak to law enforcement, will know somebody who completed suicide, who died by
Mhm.
suicide.
Mhm.
Yes. Right. And so in his
Right.
department, he had somebody who killed himself with his service weapon.
My goodness.
So this is and this is that was what 2006,
No.
7,
No.
5?
No, 11 or 12.
Oh, was it? Okay. I thought it was.
Oh, wait a minute. There's only one, right?
Yeah.
No, it was like 11.
Yeah. Okay.
2011.
But it's like, and then we weren't talking about it. Now we're at least talking about it. And there's organizations, like one of the organizations that I contract with is a national nonprofit called Safe Leo. And it's SAFLEO, which cracked me up when they told me it's suicide awareness for law enforcement officers. And I said, wow, you really had to spell it out for them, didn't you? Because there's no like hidden anything in that acronym. But we talk about that, right? Because it's this. You're
We're a little slow.
They're a little slow. But we talk about that because the idea of, dealing with suicidal thoughts, right? So once again, don't want to be seen as weak. So we have grief and loss there of like, what if I'm weak? But then also the loss of losing somebody in the department by, by their own hands.
Or a line of duty death,
Or taking too many risks. That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about line of duty death.
or
I did.
injury.
I have it
to-
written down
to
here.
your,
Death.
Your partners or your fellow
Mhm,
officers
mhm.
or firemen too, or
Because they're
just-
close.
yeah.
Believe it or not, they do like each other.
But no, I think when I joined, it was like nobody talked about mental health. Okay, it was like rub some dirt on it, move forward. I think I will say I had life experience when I first started. I think, and Cyndi said some people started 18, some people started 21, 22. Whether they have college or not college, it doesn't matter. But I think there's something to be said about having some life experience to be able to have a little more maturity to think about things sometimes. Is it the end all cured? Hell no. I
But
think
it helps.
but it helps some. It does. But also I think, some officers, they have wives that, like Cyndi said, they had to be a cop's wife or whatever, and that was it. And these guys would come.
There was no
work,
room for
and they would just
Talk
be
about
miserable.
pressure.
Like my wife is, or they're working, and the wife is out banging somebody else. Now there were guys who were banging other people too. I mean, I'm not, but it was both doing it, and
Mhm.
but I mean, it was devastating. The guy comes to work, you can't work because my wife's out with her boyfriend. I'm like, okay, really, I don't want to hear this. We got a call to go to. This is not good right now.
How do you think that's changed?
I think what's changed now though is that people can ask for help, and I think that there's some screenings that as long as I don't care if it's a chaplain, a therapist,
Priest,
a priest, it doesn't matter.
peer support.
Peer support, as long as they know the culture, whether it's a fireman, a police officer, a dispatcher, paramedic, I don't care. You have to know the culture before you have to be able to walk in those shoes and not talk the talk. You got to walk the walk for us to respect you. And I think now that a lot of the counselors, chaplains, and so on and so forth are getting some training
and doing ride-alongs, things
and,
like that.
And not being goobers about it. I mean, no, seriously, we used to have chaplains go and like, oh, well, they'd be asking me like, well, what is your belief in God and blah, blah. And, have you thought about it? Did you ever want to be a priest? I'm like, shut the fuck up.
Are you talking to me?
Right. I'm like, really? I'm on my way to a call right now. I don't need this crap out of you. But I mean, they would just be goobers about stuff, and it's like now they're actually like immersing themselves and wanting to learn about the culture and like when I first started, the city would send us to, if you had problems, they'd send you, we called it 1-800-KUMBAYA. And they send you this counselor. The guys, the few that went, because we told them don't really go there because they would make fun of them or not. They didn't feel welcome there because they were officers and they had guns and they didn't want guns in their office. And the guys were like, I'm in uniform. If we're in uniform by rule, we had to have a gun, right? So I think now the people that want to work with first responders are starting to learn the culture, and it's coming a little easier for us to trust, I guess maybe is the word.
I hope so. It's your word. I don't know.
And see value in some.
And is the bias against mental health coming down a little bit, and moving more toward a bias of everybody needs a little support?
I have an opinion about this, but I want you to say yours first.
With the younger generation, the bias is coming down. Okay. With I'll call it the older generation, crusty people, I'm going to say the ones that have been 15 years and more, I'll say maybe 20. I don't know. Not as much, I still think, but it's also situation. I think, depending on, what some officers, I'll say, are more learned about it, the mental health aspect, and they're sharing a little bit more.
I think there's also the
cost is a big factor.
Oh yeah, cost is a big factor. I think there's also a big part of it is also what you approach them with, because there's a lot of people that when they hear me speak or they hear other people speak, they're like, I wish somebody would have told me this 10 years ago. Right. So I think that's a big part of it. So I want to hit this one.
And real quick, it's officers that years 1 through up to 5 or 6 years, they're malleable and they'll listen to about mental health stuff.
Yep.
And after about 15, some of them, not as many as before,
start to open up.
They'll open up. It's that 6 to 12-year range as an officer. And I'm going to tell you, oh man, we knew everything. We could do everything,
It's like he read some research or something.
We could have fixed we could have fixed the entire world. You know what I mean?
I do really know.
It's like that's the gap that people have to watch out for.
Yeah.
Okay, there was one other loss that I wanted to hit. Do you want to talk about that?
You talk about it.
I'll start it. So one of the final losses that I wrote down was retirement.
Huge.
And not in I knew what it's not just retirement in itself. It's the loss of community. For me personally, when he retired, I thought, do I need to give up code 4 because I'm not going to be in law enforcement anymore? And my friends were like, and I think probably you were one of them, Jill, to say like, well, but you have your own journey and you have your own expertise. But it really does feel like, well, because I would see people like this, like, what do you really know? You're on the outside. You don't know. You're not in our bubble. And so that we knew that was possible. We were not prepared for the kick in the nuts that came
Wow.
with it. I mean, I think I can tell, like, it was like
You're gone.
it was literally a turning of a back. Like, you are out the next day. You are not in, you don't know the calls, you don't know what's coming on, you don't know what's going on in our city.
You're not part of us.
You're not part of us anymore. Like,
We're not
you are
sharing.
out.
You are
Wow,
not
that's
relevant.
harsh.
You're not relevant. That's something that he's really struggled with, is it's like, what point are these skills that I worked to refine for years and years and years? Where do I fit in society? Like, it is
use the skills I learned.
like, it is, and he and I have conversations about that all the time. But the thing is that, like, I was like, oh yeah, it'll, we'll still have people. No, it was, he's still connected with, I call him his brother from another mother, which is his friend Jared. But everybody else, like,
You're like a dinosaur. You're just like old. You're done.
Not even going on hunting trips or doing anything together. You're just completely separate. Wow.
I mean, they contracted me to come back and do some firearms training after I retired.
Because they didn't have anybody else to do it.
And so I went back and I'm like watching these guys, the way they're talking to their sergeants, and they're screwing off. And I was like, okay, no, this is the range. And I'm going to tell you something. This is my range. And I had one guy, he said something to me and I'm like, you want to leave the range? Because I'm going to tell you something. This is my range. These are my standards. This is what you will do. If you don't, I will kick you off this range. And then he went and said something to his sergeant and was like very disrespectful. And I finally looked at the sergeant. I'm like, what the hell's wrong with you guys? I said, put on your freaking big boy pants and tell these assholes to toe the line.
And can I?
But I had no authority.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get to.
In the old days, I mean, I would have got in the range really. This is what we're doing, and I'd kick people off the range. But I would have had to go to one of the sergeants and tell them to kick this guy off the range.
And I think that's a big part of it too. And Bobby has said, even now, we'll be driving and he'll say like, yeah, I'm just pulling people over, right? So it's this like
corrective behavior.
It's this idea of like having this authority, right? So there's so many different facets that go along with the retirement. It was the turning of the back and knowing, and just like the total, like the cut off. And I was like, wow. Like, nobody was like, hey, LT, how are you doing? Like, there was nothing, no phone calls. They were like, here's your certificate, go on your way, kind of a thing.
Talk about loss and grief.
Yeah, it was hard. And it was hard to watch him go through that, because he gave his life to that department. He gave part of our lives to that department.
A huge part of it, yeah.
And I gave my life in a way to that department.
And he gave part of his heart to that department.
Oh, absolutely. And so
literally.
Yeah, literally.
So many.
But never got a call to see how I was doing from it.
Nope.
Except for Jared.
About what?
Jared, my heart attack.
Oh yeah.
That's like after a funeral and nobody checks in on you. Wow.
Yeah. So there's been
that's why you got to build.
Go ahead.
This.
And friendships and a support system, right? It was such a, like, that was I don't know. That's been the hardest loss for, I think, us to go through. I mean, did he go through shit at work? Yep. I'm telling you, this is worse than any of those things at work. We understand trauma. We understand that things happen at work. We understand there's going to be grief. We understand there's line of duty deaths. We understand all those aspects. The loss and the pain that happened after that retirement process, and just the sudden like bottom falling out was not something
Being
that
cut off from everybody you've ever hung out and done with and spent your
Yeah, how many
life with for the last 24 years.
Mhm. And I think that's probably why his chief, his former chief,
Our first chief.
the
yeah.
first chief, who we loved, and still do, really stayed connected with him. And Bobby is a good friend. And Bobby maintained that relationship after Ed retired. And I like looking back,
Mhm.
I really think that Ed needed that to feel like he was still relevant. That word relevant is so, you said that, like you're not
Mhm.
relevant anymore. And I know like my own father is 89, almost 90. And I realized that like the end of life cycle, right? You're looking backwards and saying, what's my legacy? What's my relevance? And that is like a lot of what happened. And
Well, the commander,
it's just, yeah, go ahead.
Ed and I, we still have to go to qualifications once a
Oh
year
yeah.
for retirement carrying our firearms. So Ed and I, now Ed retired in 2013, so he's like 70.
Wow, really?
He's 72 now, but still good shape, and you know. But he and I are the ones that go back to get our qualifications for retirement. Well, the commander
Mm-hmm.
will not
I know who it is.
let Ed and I come. We used to do the qualifications when the guys would go to the range on a training day or the qualifications for the department. Well, the commander will not let Ed and I come to the range and qualify anymore. We do it privately with one of the firearms guys who's really a good guy. I mean, I love Travis and I love Jay. They're really good guys. But the commander will not let the chief and I, the S chief and I, go to the range and associate with the guys.
Like the camaraderie that could occur with that is
know,
not allowed.
Because it would take away from his, well, he's just an ass. But that's okay. I mean, he's going to find out one day what happens when you retire. And, you know, like I said, Ed and I still kind of goof off, and he's only in town half the year. So, but Jared and I, you know, he's still working. But I mean, we enjoy the times that we had together, you know.
Right.
But it really was, yeah.
We were the
kick
house
to the groin when I retired.
We were the house where people came. Like we hosted 4th of July parties. We hosted barbecues for the department, and so it was a shock, really.
But,
yeah, and your house is the one to do that.
Yeah.
Wow, Bobby, that's incredible.
So, I mean,
we've talked a lot, so I don't know what kind of.
I want you to talk a little bit
questions.
about what you do for Code for Couples and how that plays into this.
Well, I mean, I think Cyndi starting Code for Couples, I mean, I remember she came to me, she said, hey, I want to do this. I want to do a podcast. And then it came, and I was like, oh no, that's great. That's great. And
you have fun with your little hobby, honey.
But as it went on, and then I understood more, and I got, as I call it, therapized on the porch.
We call it mind reading, but it's okay.
Well, all right, fair enough. But I started seeing the value in it, and then like, you know, I started promoting it to the guys. You know, oh yeah, she's got a podcast, because I was proud of her. You know, I am proud of her.
Should be.
And she took basically, you know, crap or lemons. Let's say she's taken lemons and made lemonade out of it, because she took, and then she wanted to write the book. And she said, you know, hey, if I write this book, you know, there's a lot of stuff in the book that you're not gonna look good at.
I don't know, but I said,
well,
I think I said, can I share our stories?
Share our stories. And I was like, okay. And I mean, I'm thinking, oh crap, but all right, fine. You know what I mean? It is what it is. I mean, am I proud of it? No. Am I glad we had to go through it? Not really, but
I love
if
your
other
honesty.
people can learn,
Mhm.
then fine. Then it was worth it. In another, I'm proud of my service. I wish I could have done more, but if I can give back to law enforcement this way, I like going and talking to the guys and girls, and I think one of the things I want to, the courage part. I like that one.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, because I mean, courage to me was, like, oh, let's go kick in the door and shove guns down people's faces, and
Make them poop their pants. True
Mhm.
story.
true story. But no, I mean, that was courage to me. I mean, going and, oh, this is a scary situation, or you got to do this. Nope, let's go do it. Yeah. Oh, saying that you need help, with some mental health problems or whatever. No, that was weak bitch stuff. I mean, seriously, when I
Right.
started. So that's what I like about, with the code 4, if I can help educate, people saying, look, I was one of you, I was, give me a job, give me anything. I'm going to do it. I don't care, yeah. But the courage now to say, no, you know what? I can do all that, but I need help afterwards to balance it out of my brain. I think the biggest thing with the code 4 that is watching the light bulbs go off in everybody's head, where they're like, oh, wait a minute. Oh yeah. Or they read the book and then, we're both there and they're looking at us going, and I always introduce myself, I'm the asshole in the book. But people, they look at us and they're like, wait a minute, you've been married all these years and you guys went through all that and you guys are doing this and you're sharing. And I think that's the value of it.
It absolutely is. And I've seen those faces, not from the law enforcement, from therapists who gone like, oh wait, I was doing this wrong. I didn't know that part of it. I've seen those light bulbs go off around a room when you two have spoken. And
So, I mean,
that's the legacy for the both of you. It really is.
yeah, I
It's
think,
changing the lives of lots of law enforcement officers and their families.
but even the firefighters, I mean, I think, they still live the same kind of, I'm going to call it screwed up lifestyle, that, I mean, I'm just, and the military too. I mean, you got families that guys or girls going off, for deployments for all that time. And I mean, somebody's got to stay home and hold down the fort. And, there's a lot of stress. And I mean, and there are other people that don't make enough money in this world, but, and they need the support too. So, I mean, I think, like you said, just if any of that, just is that we can do, and I guess the biggest thing I learned is, well, I'm not bulletproof.
Oh, yeah.
There was
Yeah.
grief.
Yeah.
That was grief. Yeah.
But, figuring out that, well, I don't know. How many times you faced death in 21 years?
That's the thing, right? Like you probably faced death a lot, and mentally, right? Mentally, you block it out. Mentally, you had a mindset of, so I feel like we're dropping in the middle of a story for your class watching, but so he had a heart attack on September 1st, 2022. I remember the date vividly.
3:00 in the afternoon.
3:00 in the afternoon. Yep. And he was, as somebody that, and as a couple, really, that's like, oh, we're strong, right? Because we went through all the law enforcement stuff. It was like, I got your back. We're strong. We're not going to be those weak bitches that call 911. And for whatever reason, he, in the middle of this, I was on my way home because he's like, something's wrong. He said, call 911. And thank God he did. Like, that was the moment where he's like, I think I need help. And that is hard because for law enforcement or any first responder to ask for help, it's hard. So, long story short, he got to go on an ambulance ride and got a little electroshock therapy in a different way. And
Then I woke up and they had to give it to me again.
yeah, rode
While
that
you
a
were
couple
awake?
times. Rode it,
Yes.
rode it while he was awake, fully awake. He said
Oh,
he will
good
never
God.
forget that in his whole entire life.
Mhm.
But yeah, so survived that. And the hardest part was dealing with the mental
Mm.
part. The physical part was fine.
Oh, cardiac
really.
rehab was good.
Yeah, he loved cardiac rehab. It was the mental of what got him through all of his law enforcement career was I'm bulletproof. He busted down doors, serving warrants and doing everything else by saying I'm bulletproof. And, you know, evidence-based, nothing happened, right? Evidence-based.
Evidence-based.
All the
You're-
evidence says I'm bulletproof. And then
Until your heart stops.
he's here in his safe space, right? Safe space,
Mhm.
hanging out at home. And so that's been that opened up a lot of doors, I will say, in the
Mhm.
sense of like oh shit moments. And that's what he like
Right.
worked through some things in therapy and did ART. I do ART. He went to an ART therapist, which is an eye movement therapy as well. But yeah.
And luckily she was versed in our culture.
Yeah.
And she
I made sure.
Of course you
went to
did.
somebody that I could be okay
because
with.
she called me out on my own stuff. If I tried to skirt around the issue or whatever, she'd be like, "Stop BSing me," you know.
Mhm.
I mean, she knew. So
And
That's
that's the
what I
importance
needed.
of having someone who understands the culture.
yeah.
So I appreciate the fact that everybody's learning about how it relates to us for sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
I hope he teaches more with Code 4 because I think he has a lot to offer.
I think he does too, and I'm looking forward to it and more time on the podcast too. Yeah.
Uh-oh.
How's
Yeah, it was
that for a
funny.
volley?
There you go.
It was funny when it started because he was like, "Oh yeah, that's cute," and then I was like, "I want to do this bigger thing," and he's like, I don't know about that, but it's been
It's been
been good.
every step's been scary but good.
And
So
all of you watching are very lucky to be hearing from both of these folks today. And you really do need to follow up on the information that's going to be in the course so that you can find the podcast, because I expect everyone to listen to it and write a
and
piece
maybe
about
listen
it.
to Jill's episode.
That would be fun.
Oh.
Yeah, I am on there, aren't I? Yes. That was a long time ago. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.
Well,
More
thank you
than
for
you
having
can
us.
possibly
You're so
know.
welcome. You're so
And the
welcome. Thanks
University,
for having
Marian
us.
University thanks you as well. Let me turn off the recording.